Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Here it is. It's Thursday night already. I think it is. Yeah, it's Thursday. No. Yes, it's Thursday night. How about that? I'm Scotty Roberts. You're here on my channel, Adventure Town Communique. And it doesn't really come up that way in the link because something when I set this whole channel up over a year ago, I screwed up something with my name. So it's actually Mr. Scotty Roberts, but it's Adventure Town Communique. That's the title I gave it. And most of you know that by now, but I just thought I'd share that little bit of information. Let me let you know right away. First thing, 2 hours from now, minus 1 minute, I'm going to be live on the Rocky Stucci Situation Room. Rocky, however, will not be here tonight. He had some unavoidable work-related things that he couldn't do. You know, the work we all have to do on the side of the real work we do, which is radio. So he got unavoidably detained there. Excuse me. Didn't think that was worth my cough button. And he will not be there. So I am going to be live with a good friend of mine, Dan Madsen. Now, you've heard us talk about Dan a few times, and that is why, by the way, I decided to just do an off-the-cuff, off the top of my head, unrehearsed Star Trek show here tonight on my channel. And you can see, I don't have my command patch with the star. I've got the science and medical patch on there. So that's what Spock wore and McCoy wore with the little circle in the middle. So I had to wear that tonight, and my microphone hides it. So you'll see me do a lot of this tonight. Hey, look. So I'm doing my own little Star Trek up front, off the top of my head type of thing tonight, just to talk about how I grew up with Star Trek, what it meant to me, and I'm going to be looking forward to your comments. I will try to look more to the comments tonight than I usually do. But I'm doing this show because I'm interviewing Dan Madsen on the Rocky Stucci show tonight, the Situation Room. Now, Rocky and I would both have been interviewing Dan, but as I mentioned, Rocky's been detained at work. He can't get away. He's got meetings even this late at night, believe it or not. That's because he works pretty late some nights. And so he can't make it in. And so it's just me with Dan Madsen, and which is okay. Rocky, Star Trek, he's like, oh, what is it, that Trek Star thing? So he's Trek Wars. So Rocky, who fell asleep during Star Wars and yawns through Star Trek, I don't think, frankly, folks, I think he's a latent closet Star Trek watcher. He just likes to play that. He's not. So there you go. So I'm just filling in for him tonight. Let me turn this off. Sorry I didn't do that ahead of time. And I'm filling in for both of us. So it's not the meatball and the cannoli tonight. It's just the cannoli. Playing the meatball and the cannoli. As a matter of fact, I think I got Rocky messaging me right now. Oh, he just sent me a thumbs up. There, I had to go off channel to tell you that. So Dan Madsen. Dan Madsen's been a friend of mine since 1981 or 82. We can't even remember how far back our friendship goes. But he was doing the Star Trek official fan club newsletter way back then. And he started off in the late 70s doing that. And he grew that little fan club newsletter into quite an empire. He got the first licensure from Paramount to do the official Star Trek fan club newsletter. He did the Star Trek Communicator magazine. He did, from there, got seen by George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, saw what he was doing for Paramount and for Star Trek, flew him down to Skywalker Ranch and got him involved in doing the Lucasfilms magazines, the Star Wars fan club magazines. He started doing the Indiana Jones magazines. Then he went on from there and eventually did the Lord of the Rings magazines, doing the same thing for Weta, I think it was, the production company that owned them. And so Dan had quite the little Star Trek fan-sided pop cultural empire going on. And he did all this because it's like I said to him once before, how did we get into the things we got into is something we were talking about. And we all kind of had those same beginnings. It started with that curiosity. It started with that love of things like Star Trek and Star Wars. And as we got older, we took those into the things that we did and said, how can I make my life revolve around this stuff that I enjoy so much? And not just have it be a hobby, but something that could support me. And Dan ended up taking it into pop culture. I ended up taking my love of science fiction and all of those things into my profession. I went into advertising, then I went into writing. And as you know, the things I write about, ancient origins, mysteries, things like that, ghosts, the paranormal. So Dan and I kind of went these two slightly divergent paths, both starting with the same thing, those curiosities about what really pushed us. Let's see. You know what, Bruce? I'm right there with you. Captain Kirk taught me how to be a man. And no matter what anybody says about him, all the jokes about William Shatner or his acting style or things like that, Kirk was the guy when I was a little kid growing up in the late 60s and in the early 70s when I caught most of my Star Trek, when it was syndicated. Kirk was the guy that I wanted to be. And I did a little show on this not long ago, several weeks ago now. But that article I wrote on Kirk and how he influenced me and how he became, there was a psychological factor to it. I want to talk about that a little bit more tonight as we go on. But Bruce, you hit the nail on the head. As I was growing up, he was my hero. You are on very shaky ground with me as a kid if you insulted the good captain or insulted his ship or the show that I watched. That would put me a usual pacifist when I was a kid. That would have put me to fisticuffs. So, and I will say this: we'll save the bulk of this for later. But not having had a dad in my home, never knew my dad. Kirk became the surrogate for that, but not just the surrogate in that pop cultural sense, but also in the sense of he is the guy that I molded myself after at a very early age. I wanted to be him. I wanted to grow up. I wished I'd looked like him. I wanted to act like him. I wanted to be the kind of man that he was portraying on that show. And to me back then, you didn't go, oh, there's an actor, William Shatner, portraying this. You didn't care. You were all about the character. So, yeah, I'm right there with you, Bruce. And each of the crew represents a different version of a responsible adult someone could emulate. And Bruce, you're right about that. And this is what we're going to talk a little bit about this. I've got an article up in front of me. I'm going to hit some points that I want to bring out as we talk about this whole thing about Star Trek and its effect on the world. But what I really wanted to do with this tonight is, as I said, as we started, off the top of my head, not really writing out any kind of treatise or any kind of format or outline of what I wanted to do tonight, was just talk about Star Trek, the effect that I believe that it's had on the world, the effect it had on me, the effect that I think it's had on many people. Now, look, you're looking at the time when Star Trek hit television in its original form way back in the 60s, 1966. A year before that, they had already done a pilot that had been rejected. Anybody here that's into Star Trek knows this. They filmed a pilot, and it was rejected by the censors at the television network. And so they were given a very rare opportunity to go, and I think they saw the promise in it because they sent Gene Roddenberry, the creator, back to recreate a second pilot, which was unheard of. Now, in the middle of that, they lost their main actor. They had, if any of you have been watching like Star Trek Discovery, you've heard me talk about Captain Pike, Anson Mount, who is portraying Captain Pike in the newest Star Trek series that's been out. That character was the original character in Star Trek. It went from Robert T. April, who was the original captain. They never did anything with him. And then they changed it to Captain Christopher Pike. And Pike was in the first pilot. That was where you had the actor Jeffrey Hunter portraying Captain Pike. And Captain Pike, his first officer was a woman. Unheard of in the 60s, of course. Just starting that rise into feminism and that rise into women taking power positions. Well, they had Majel Barrett, the very hot and sexy Majel Barrett, I might add. She played Nurse Chapel in the rest of the series because they nixed that character. But in the first pilot, she was the first officer to Captain Christopher Pike. And he also had Spock as his science officer. And that was, of course, portrayed by Leonard Nimoy. And so they kept Spock. They lost Majel Barrett as number one, which was the first mate, the first officer, and Jeffrey Hunter, who was a movie star. He wasn't a TV star in the 60s. He was a big screen movie star that came to the small screen, started portraying Captain Christopher Pike. In the interim, his wife, who was also his agent, kind of at the time, they were pushing for more money when they asked to do a second, because what they saw was he probably did this pilot thinking it's a TV show. It's the 60s. Who knows how it's going to last? It got rejected, but then they get the opportunity to do it again, to do a second run. He's probably thinking, okay, there's something to this. Might be some meat, might have some teeth, might have some legs. And he started asking for more money. And of course, they turned him down. Somewhere in the meantime there, he died. I want to say it was a plane crash, and I got that wrong once before in my memory. I'm trying to remember how Jeffrey Hunter died. But he became absolutely unavailable, of course, to do any kind of role for Star Trek. And that's where they picked up William Shatner. And Where No Man Has Gone Before was that pilot episode with William Shatner. And of course, I love, by the way, who was I talking to? Jerry Armitage. Are you in the chat room here tonight? I think you said that you haven't watched. You've watched all the Treks except the original. You thought it was a little too old for your liking. I would highly recommend to anybody, if you haven't watched Star Trek, you can start with any of the series you want. But if you want to go back to the foundations, back to the, if you will, the zen of Star Trek, you got to go back to the original. You got to see what it was made of, why Gene Roddenberry wrote what he wrote, why he created what he created. And they say of the original that it was all, and this is cliche for a lot of people who know Star Trek, that it was morality plays in each episode. Some were better than others, of course. You got into your later seasons, the later second season, the third season. Some of the shows suffered because Roddenberry got his hands off of it and let other people run. I think it just didn't have as good an effect as it did. Skull Fracture. There it is, Susie. Jeffrey Hunter. And I think was it a plane crash? Was it an automobile accident? I thought it was something like that happened to him that killed him. But let me just go back through here before I get too deep into this and just see if there's anybody. Spartan, good to see you. NCC 1701. That's right. As a matter of fact, let me tip this up. There you go. There she is right there up on my wall, way in the back there. And so, and for those who haven't seen it, wearing it's not my command patch, but it's my sciences patch. So let me tip that back down. All right. So let me say hi to some of you folks that have come in. We got Jason Rios and Bruce. Good to see you, Bruce. Glad you're here. Susie Q. Nice to see you. Lucky Stone. It's good to have you here. Let's see. We got Joey Aragon lives. Hey, Joey. I'm glad to hear that you live. That's a good thing. I don't know if you and I have ever actually talked before. And if we have, then I've farted it away into my squirrely brain. VBJ, 1976, good to see you. Hey, y'all yourself. And let's see. Boy, I hate to do this. My eyes are wonky right now. All day staring at my computer. Now I need these. That's not even helping. Those are my readers. I need my real glasses, but they're bifocals, and then I got to look down my nose at you to read the screen. I'll just squint a little bit. Rocky Stucci, how you doing, brother? Rocky's in the room, so shut up. Good to see you, brother. Wish you could be here tonight. Wish you could be here for the interview with Dan Madsen, but hey, we don't want to. I was going to say bore him with somebody who doesn't know Star Trek. I'm just kidding you. I'm just kidding you. I don't mean it. No, I don't mean it. It was a joke. So, Shannon Kling, good to see you. And let's see. Who else we got? Johan, Dancing Gypsy, good to see you. Lewis, the Patriots Corner, good to see you, brother. And as we scroll down, Ron Frisbee, good to see you, brother artist. And illustrator and all those good things. And so, I don't see anything that really stands out by way of comment as I'm scrolling through. But let's see. What did you love, Shannon Kling? That's so cool. Love it, Scotty. I'm trying to see what you're referring to here. Love the original, says Ron Frisbee. It helped you love The Next Generation? Absolutely. When The Next Generation came out, all these new iterations and these new incarnations of Star Trek were all things that, remember, when I was a kid, we're talking the very first episode of Star Trek I ever saw. I was about 5 or 6 years old, somewhere in there. It was the episode Shore Leave, and it was in its original run. And we lived in a little duplex, a house. We went upstairs to see the old guy who owned the house. We were talking to him, my mom was, and playing on his little black and white TV was Shore Leave from Star Trek. And I got to watch most of that episode. And that is the episode that got me interested in Star Trek. But it was another year, really, or two before I actually saw much more. It was when it started coming out in syndication. And then I watched it every day faithfully. And that's what hooked me, was the old episodes. And whenever we saw a new incarnation or the inkling of anything Star Trek, there had been such a groundswell movement to revive that series. And that's why the third season came along after it had been canceled. And there were so many letters that came into Paramount that they had to re-up the series for a third season. But they only went a half a season before they canceled it again. But then the groundswell grew. And people wanted to see more of it. And so they were canceled in 1968. 68 or 67. Got to get my dates right. They were started in 66. So 66, 67, 68, 68. And it was the early 70s before they came back in syndication. Now, I remember somewhere along in there when I was in high school was one of the first Star Trek related events I ever attended. It was like in 1976. Yeah, it was 1976. And my children seem to always forget that when I'm on radio, they're supposed to stay out of here. Sorry, folks. Okay, bye. Please get out for that. Thank you. Bye. All right. Hopefully they didn't just unplug my mics. They just tripped on all my mics. All right. Good night. All right. I got to tell you, folks, the only reason I'm a little terse, we went through this and we go through this every time my wife steps out of the house and I'm doing radio. I've got the little one always wants to come in. The kids are out there. So I made this is a parenting thing, guys. No uncertain terms. I laid down the law tonight and I said, nobody, and I mean nobody comes in the studio tonight while I'm doing radio, because my little one comes in all the time. She'll wake up when Rocky and I are doing radio after 11 o'clock at night. She comes down here and slips into the room and has to crawl up on my lap. And trying to take care of that while you are doing radio is ridiculous. So I think about the only way that I could make it fun is to talk about it and play it off. It's not a mistake. It just happens. It's my kid. So there it is. I am the law, Judge Dredd. Exactly, Iowa X. And I love my little girl, but I tell her for this hour to an hour and a half, you got me all day. I work here all day long. My kids are in and out. But the little one, I think it's just in her head. I gotta go. I gotta go f with dad while he's on radio. So that's there. My son, which you didn't see, she breaks through the door just a few minutes ago, and my 10-year-old son is behind her with his arms around her. He's going, "Don't go in there! Don't go in!" And he's pulling on her, and she's fighting him. And all she was doing was tattling anyway. So I don't think he cared. He just knew she wasn't supposed to come in here. So there you go. Now that we've worked through the interruption of my small child, and the only reason, by the way, there's any terseness at all is it's become a daily thing when I'm doing radio. I got a lock on that door. I just need to lock it. There's one time I locked that a couple of weeks ago. She's pounding on my door while I'm doing live radio. So there you go. Anyway, moving on. So I'm trying to remember where I was exactly. I don't think it matters, but dress them up as Star Trek characters, says Johan. Absolutely. Give them 5 minutes, then out. Yeah, that's a way to do it. And I'm not against that. You know what I was talking about was Star Trek The Next Generation. When we'd see all these new incarnations of Trek coming along, go back to the first one, which was Star Trek The Next Generation. Well, technically, Star Trek The Animated Series was the first one. That came out, I think, I want to say in 1970 to 71. And that was a pretty good series for an animated Saturday morning cartoon. Choppy animation, all of that. You're talking Hanna-Barbera type of animation. And so that came out. But when Next Generation came out, it was 1988. So you're talking 20 years after the cancellation of the original Star Trek. I went to, I know what I was mentioning, in 76. I went to my first live event. It was called Star Trek Live, with none other than Gene Roddenberry himself, the creator of the show, speaking live. There weren't any of the actors there. There was just Gene Roddenberry, and I think there were a couple of other guests, and we went to hear him speak. But my buddy and I were in the 10th grade. We made Star Trek costumes for that. And we're talking, not your top end stuff. But I still have these patches. That's from those days. Back 40 years ago. That's how old this thing is. And I made because it was the only fabric I could find that was velour, which is what the uniforms were made out of. I made a red shirt. And I got the braid, and I tried to find braid that was the closest. I think I might have bought it. There was a place called Lincoln Enterprises that was all Star Trek stuff. And it was owned and run, I believe, by Majel Barrett and Gene Roddenberry. And or Majel Barrett Roddenberry. And so I bought the patches through them, and I bought the braid, and I bought the patterns, and my mom showed me how to use the sewing machine to help me through problem spots. And I took the red velour and I made the shirt exactly to proportions to the I was going to say recipes, the patterns of the shirt. And so my buddy and I, we both made them. We both went to this little event, and I had a tricorder that I built. If you don't know what a tricorder is, you're gonna have to go look it up. I don't have one sitting here. Got one in storage, but all I've got here is my phaser. So that's the first event I went to. And then Star Trek, it was another 10, 12 years before it came out as a series. But of course, you did have the motion picture in 1979. Star Trek, the motion picture, which everybody raved about going to see because it was Star Trek. It was slow. It was plodding. It was a bit boring in places because the director of that, Wise, I think it was, he wanted to show off all these great visual effects, which was more like, I'm tripping. It was like that would have been a great movie to get high to. and then sit and watch it and go, oh man. So, but it was a good movie otherwise. And it was bringing back the old characters in this new revamped Enterprise, the new uniforms, which were okay. It was 70s style, so use your imagination if you didn't see it. And the motion picture, V'ger, yes, James, it was V'ger and Voyager. And so we saw that. But then in 88 came Next Generation. Then, of course, what did they suffer the very first season? They suffered from a writer's strike in Hollywood. And so the episodes were kind of not as good as they could have been, but they were good episodes. But they built on that, and it was an amazing series. As you know, that's been off the air, by the way, since 1994. Do the math, that's 25 years. Star Trek The Next Generation has been off the air. It ran for 9 years, not 9 years, 6 years, 7 years, something like that. If I do my math, 88 to 94. So 6 years. And amazing episodes that they did. But they went off the air. And now it's been 25 years since that. And now they're coming out with Picard, the new series on CBS All Access. And yeah, Melinda, time sure does fly. And Brianna, how you doing? LOL BC, it's a cold life being a bald woman. Yeah, I'll bet. I heard that she had just died recently too. Persis Kumbata or something was her name. Can't remember. Let's see. And going on. Yeah, I don't have that shirt, by the way, anymore, James. I wish I did. I don't know whatever happened to it. Just vanished. You know, you leave home, you go to college, everything disappears. And we even did Super 8 not animated, Super 8 films back then with my Super 8 camera. We do the special effects. We try to do the tricorder. We try to do the phasers and all of that. All that stuff disappeared on me. It's just gone. It's like probably all shoved in one box that disappeared in some move somewhere. So let's see. Animation has developed so much. I watched Pocahontas last night and noted she had no fingernails. Yeah, animation's come a really long way, Suze. So moving on here. Star Trek Discovery, says Gaza, I reckon is the best one out of all of them. Blows my mind. A great the program. Jason says all the Star Trek series were good, except for Deep Space Nine. I couldn't get into that. I was into Deep Space Nine. I saw all of those episodes. I saw all of Voyager. Saw all of the Next Generation. I didn't see every episode of Enterprise, believe it or not. It wasn't that I wasn't into it. It was that I was just too busy. Life was too damn busy. And I didn't get to see it all the time. And I enjoyed that series. I loved Discovery for all the criticism because it's new and it's supposed to be taking place just before the time of Kirk and Spock, right at the time of Pike and Spock. But the technology, well, it's so much flashier. Well, television is updated. Special effects have updated. The look has updated. There's more budget. This is what they would have done with the original Star Trek if they'd had more than $12 a week to work with. So, that original set, that original bridge set, built out of balsa wood and plastic and some flashy electric lights behind the board. So everything you see in Discovery, and I got to tell you, I just said this to I can't remember who I was talking to. The Discovery, the big reveal for me, the second season of Discovery, they had Captain Pike that they brought in. The Enterprise was dry docked for storyline reasons, and Spock is missing, and Pike commands the Discovery, and they go searching for Spock. And that whole story arc through the whole second season was about Pike and Spock. And what was very cool about that is I don't know if you can hear that. I have children just screaming in the background. Mom has made it home. I've heard her voice over theirs. But if you hear that, there's no real child slaughter going on here. It's my children outside the studio door. So, once again, my apologies from one dad to other moms and dads. You know how it is, kids. Um, so I either have to soundproof my office or I've got to move it to a different location, which, by the way, psst, on the down low, Rocky and I have been talking about the possibility of a studio. He's talking about the possibility of getting a new studio space, which is outside of our homes. So that's a possibility that may be coming down the pike. So now my mic, I think, is directional. So hopefully you're not picking up all the child massacre going on out that direction beyond the door. So there you go. Um, let's see. I was going to say about discovering Captain Pike. Those gorgeous sets for the Enterprise, all built on a different sound stage. They didn't revamp sets to do that, which tells you something. There's a big groundswell that wants there to be a Captain Pike series. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do. They've got the sets. They invested a lot of money into those Enterprise sets, and they were only used in one episode. And that was as you get toward the end of the second season. It's not a giveaway because you know it's eventually going to happen, but you're waiting for this reveal. The reveal of, especially if you're an old Star Trek, an original series person, you're waiting for that reveal. And when those doors came open and they took you into the bridge of the Enterprise, you were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so that was a lot of, I'd like to see a Captain Pike series. But let me move this all back. In talking about the title I gave this tonight was The Zen of Star Trek. The kick-ass Zen of Star Trek. Now, Zen, what is that? It's the calming, it's the peacefulness, it's a philosophy, it's a Om. It's all these things that we associate with Zen. It's finding that perfect place and that perfect position, spiritually, consciousness, and all of that. So I thought, that sounds pretty good. The Zen of Star Trek. And then the kick-ass Zen of Star Trek. Because Star Trek has done so much for so many people over so many years that those who brush it off as, oh, it's just an old series from the 60s that became a phenomenon and is still going, they don't get it unless they stop and they look at it. Star Trek for me was something that I know my brother over here, Bruce, he said something about always wanting to be like Kirk. Kirk showed him what it was like to be a man. Now, somebody off the cuff might say, well, Kirk, he was a whore. There was even Eddie Murphy made jokes about it. And everybody knows, Kirk had a different woman every week. And so it's TV of the 60s, he was the guy with the girl in every port. But there was something about William Shatner's portrayal of Captain Kirk that struck a chord with me, a little boy back in the early 70s, where I found him to be a man who was alone. He had friends, but not a great many of them. He had McCoy, he had Spock. And he was a man alone, and he governed his ship alone. He was a man who, as you heard in some of the future films about Kirk, he was a man who cheated death as the character was developed. But you saw the early stages of that. He would cheat death. He would claw against death. He would fight death. He was a man that didn't want, and some of you will recognize some of these lines. He said, I don't want to second guess myself. I don't want to go back and wonder why I turned right when I should have turned left. He's a man that needed his pain. He thrived off of the pain that formed him into who he was. And he had a great many lovers. And he was in command. He was a man who knew command, a man who knew diplomacy. And so when I, as a little kid who didn't have a dad in the home, I didn't even know who my dad was. We never met him. And there's not a weird story. They were just divorced when I was a kid, and he just left. He was gone. And um, I think it's worth saying I have a relationship with him now, but I never knew him till I was 30 years old. So, not having that dad there, Kirk became kind of this surrogate father through a fictional sense, through a television sense. Um, he became the thing that I wanted to be. Not just Starship Captain, but there was a deeper chord that was hit. This is the zen I'm talking about, the effect that this had on me. Star Trek became something that was more than a television show. It became something that really was something I started to appropriate on a personal level. Not in a weird sense, not like going to to a mental hospital and saying I'm Captain Kirk or Napoleon. Nothing like that. It took a deeper root than that. In that, it showed me the way, at least the way Gene Roddenberry idealized how things should be. Now, he was a socialist, if not a communist. I wouldn't agree with his politics nowadays, so I don't look at him. But what he was promoting in Star Trek was a perfect world, a perfect utopia, a world that worked. Everybody on that bridge was supposed to be an international cast on the bridge, which you had. You had African American, you had Chinese or Japanese. I'm sorry, you had Russian, who were our enemies behind the Iron Curtain at the time. You had all these different characters, and they represented this crew that was supposed to come together and be something. A movement, says Susie Q. Good times, yes. Um, let's see. Did somebody say something here about this? Scrolling up for me a little fast. Lola Joy. I see no logic in wanting to worship a deity that demands you live in perpetual fear. Spock. Yeah, I did a t shirt with that quote on it. I see no logic in wanting to worship a deity that demands you live in perpetual fear. Spock said that. There's the Zen, man. Go over to Son of a Patriot. That's my Etsy page. You can go to Rocky's and my page, streamingtalkradio.com. Scroll down a bit, you'll see the Son of a Patriot banner. Click on it. You can get my Spock shirt. And it's in there. There's the perfect Zen of Spock and of Star Trek. And if you noticed, if you watched Star Trek, as those characters evolved from television series to movies, you found that now, like Spock, he became more and more and more spiritual in nature. The original series, he had his spirituality. He had his Vulcan ways. He played the Vulcan harp, which was very cool. If you look that up, I'd like to have one of those. They've made those so they're actually working instruments instead of just these fictional props. But the more you got into the series, the more he had a very Zen quality about him, a very maybe more Buddhist almost quality about him. He was he meditated. You'd find him in robes in his quarters and things like that. This is what he did. So that had an effect. All of this stuff had an effect on me as I was growing up, and especially Kirk, because I wanted to be him. Now, not only let's shift gears for just a moment. Not only was there here, I lost something that I had up here. Let me find it again. You had the technology and other things from Star Trek that became things that were that came out of how Star Trek affected the world. Let's see. Hold on a second. Let me see how I can, if I can find this. How Star Trek changed the world, and let's see where I had something called up here. Right here. This is it. Now, these are some ways, amazing ways, I think, that Star Trek changed the world. And it might sound far fetched because it was a fictional series, but The truth is that science fiction, this particular series, had directly or indirectly impacted a lot of things that have happened here in America. It seems absurd because Gene Roddenberry was kicking around the idea in '64, and he probably never imagined that Star Trek would still be around in 2019. Uh, and he's not even around. He died in '91. Uh, but its influence in the realm of science, technology, social progress is something that really supported the claim of how important entertainment can be. So, Star Trek, although it was entertainment, was something that had a big effect on the world around. There are a couple of things. Oh, there's a list of things I want to go through. Star Trek was responsible for an increased interest in science, believe it or not. And one of the most important ways that Star Trek has left an indelible footprint is the way in which it's inspired a generation of scientists and inventors, many of whom have fundamentally changed the way we live. In a piece that was on the Discovery Channel, from scientist and writer Ian O'Neill, he explains, and this is a quote from him: "The spirit of discovery and adventure inspired me to learn about what makes our universe tick." And the sentiment is widespread, according to O'Neill. On a daily basis, I came across scientists who claim the same thing. Star Trek, through its various incarnations, inspired them. He adds, while it would be presumptive to say that Star Trek is directly responsible for an entire generation of scientific progress, the rest of this list might make you wonder. So listen to this list now. Theoretical physics. While most of Star Trek's science and its technology is rooted in fantasy, transporters, phasers, warping space, warp drive, that hasn't stopped scientists from exploring the ideas from the shows. And one such example is the Alcubierre warp drive. It's a speculative idea that's been put forth by theoretical physicist Miguel Alcubierre, in which spacecraft could achieve faster than light travel. And the actual science behind the theory is incredibly complicated, but the end result would be something very similar to Star Trek's warp drive, or hyperspace. So this is something where a scientist was inspired by what he saw in Star Trek, the tech of Star Trek, and he worked on developing that. And I've seen this all about this in the past, recent past, and the warp speed. If you didn't know this, the warp drive, without my knowing really and understanding the technical side of all of that, the warp drive is something where an energy field is supposed to, in a sense, warp or fold space. And so you could travel, instead of traveling way out here, you fold space in essence, and you travel to the other side. And in essence, that gives you the ability to travel much faster than the speed of light. And so that's pretty cool. Lesbianism was always cool. Patriot. I don't know what I missed out there, but there you go. From Ron Frisbee. So anyway, so bending space, warp travel. Wouldn't it be interesting to know if we could travel through space at warped at a let's take warp out of it, at a faster than speed of light? If we could go places by skipping over the speed of light issue and moving on moving in a different way, what's out there? What do you suppose is out there? This got people thinking too. What's out there in Star Trek? It has really advanced, like SETI, looking for life out there in space. All those telescopes, all those antennae that are out there. These are funded projects to look for other life out there. When you think about it, we talked about this once before, the Hubble telescope. that infrared picture that they took over about a 9 or 10-day period in a very small, they said the size of your pinky fingernail. If you held it up against the night sky, it was like that size in the sky. And they took and magnified that, and over a period of 9 days with infrared photography, took pictures of that empty space. And they found in that little tiny space in the vastness of the sky over 10,000 galaxies. Now remember, Milky Way galaxy is where we live. Our solar system is one of millions of solar systems inside the Milky Way galaxy. All of a sudden, we find out in a little tiny bit of space in the sky, there's 10,000 galaxies shining through. How many multi-millions of solar systems are there? How many possibilities or probabilities that there is life out there on those planets? Maybe advanced life, like we understand it. Now take that little fingernail size in the sky at night and multiply that exponentially by filling the sky with that size and looking at that whole, how many billions upon billions of galaxies and solar systems and possible planets that are like ours do you think are out there? What if you could bend space and go there and travel there? This is stuff that Star Trek has inspired in scientific minds. These were all guys my age that grew up watching that show. Let's see. What was that? About your bike? Susie Q. Yeah, you love warp drive, but your bike only gets 130. There it is. You cannot change the laws of physics. Just think there could be a Trump on every one of those worlds. There might be Iowa X in some form or another. So moving on some of these things, non-invasive imaging and medical technology. If you know Star Trek, you know that they always had these panels from the old Star Trek above the medical beds that would be non-invasive, non-touching type of technology that would read all your functions. And Star Trek actually introduced non-invasive medical technology that seemed to magically heal wounds. But something close to it, it's not that far off. Gizmodo reported that NASA and Grok Technologies are working together on new technology that's going to have the ability to regenerate bone and muscle tissue. That could potentially change the way we deal with muscular pain, inflammation. It's not just science fiction anymore, said Grok founder and CEO Moshe Kushman. He says all indications are that the 21st century life sciences will change dramatically the next several decades. And Grok is working to define the forefront of a new scientific wave. So that's very interesting. That's all. That got its start in Star Trek. I mean, that got these scientists thinking. Let's see. Spacecraft. Am I on 2 or 3 here? Yeah, spacecraft propulsion. Now, the Alcubierre warp drive is a fascinating idea, but it exists strictly in speculative world. Enter ion propulsion. It's a form of spacecraft propulsion that is real and currently in use by NASA. They use these using solar arrays spanning 65 feet. Dawn collects power from sun to ionize atoms of xenon, as explained by NASA, not me. These ions are expelled by a strong electric field out of the back of the spacecraft, producing a gentle thrust. Essentially, ion propulsion allows the spacecraft to not only be smaller, but to travel further without being encumbered by large amounts of fuel. And all of this is inspired by an episode of Star Trek entitled, of all things, the worst episode, I think, of the old series, Spock's Brain, this ion propulsion. The cell phone, folks. You've all seen it. Hey, hang on. I got one right here. This one just happens to be really handy, and it's not mounted to anything. But when you see this, and you see this, and you think cell phone. Kirk was always, flipping his open, and my battery's dead on this. Otherwise, it'd be giving me sound. Yeah, my batteries are dead. But he'd flip that open, and Kirk here, blah blah blah. There's his communicate. Well, the battery's not dead. It could be. There it is. All right. So that's doing that now. I think it's so old that the wiring is going. Let's see if we can. Let's see if we can get. There it is, and you recognize the sound. So when he'd flip that open, that would do that. Now, what does that remind you of? It reminds you now backwards of modern cell phones. So this is kind of where that came from, the little handheld communications device. And so that's what they carried in the original series. Let's see. Oh, I scared the cat? All right. And I have a tricorder, but it's not handy. It is packed away somewhere. We're still not fully unpacked from our last move. And some of those things, my valuable collectibles, are still in boxes. Although I keep a lot of them out. I put them out. I haven't yet. This is, by the way, folks, we consider this temporary digs. We're in a townhome for a while. We're working to get into a house. We're not unpacking everything. Some stuff that's unnecessary stays in storage. So, but yeah, I've got one. Yeah, Elon Musk has taken us to the stars faster than NASA. Very true, Ron. So the cell phone, but you look at this. Here's your cell phone, and I wish it would just, work. But yeah, you flip that open, and there's your flip phones. The cell phone has fundamentally transformed the way we live our lives. And we have Star Trek to thank for it, because a little over 40 years ago, Martin Cooper was at Motorola when he unveiled the huge, impracticable first cell phone, nicknamed the Shoe. Do you remember those? Seen pictures of them? Those big things like this, and you could hold them like they were like big military walkie-talkies. And the idea for the first cell phone began in 1973, when the small handheld communications devices on Star Trek struck Cooper as essentially being a portable cordless phone. And a prototype was ready within a year. Of course, it'd be decades before a cell phone even vaguely resembling the device on Star Trek would exist. But when the era of flip phones arrived in the early 2000s, the likeness and the comparison, obviously, was just staggering to some people. So there it is. Star Trek was responsible for the guy who invented cell phones. At least the handheld versions of cell phones. The personal computer is another one. Laptops. If you look at what they had in Star Trek, they just had these little desktop things. Of course, the whole ship was a computer. But the idea was the first electronic computer. The ENIAC, the Electric Numerical Integer and Computer, arrived in 1946. But in the decades to come, the idea of a home computer wasn't even considered a possibility, because ENIAC and a lot of the early computers, they filled warehouses, whole rooms, just to make them compute adding and subtracting. And however, Star Trek's depiction of an interactive computer was partly responsible for shifts in thinking, pushing computer programmers and designers to imagine a world where computers were used by the masses. This is where you enter Ed Roberts' Altair 8800 in 1975, named after a location the Enterprise travels to, Altair, and which became the first personal computer. And soon after, Paul B. Allen and Bill Gates joined the team, and they wrote the software for Altair Basic, which would lay the groundwork for Microsoft. Digital Trends points out that following his death in 2010, Allen and Gates wrote in a statement, Ed was truly a pioneer in the personal computer revolution and didn't always get the recognition he deserved. They added that Ed was willing to take a chance. Two young guys interested in computers long before they were commonplace, and they were always grateful to him. So this guy, based on what he saw in Star Trek, was really the start of the laptop or the smaller home personal computer. So you can see how many things started to sprout out of Star Trek. Not necessarily that Star Trek introduced the idea, but Star Trek influenced the young minds that became the scientists who made this stuff. So sounds like I'm scanning. Not sure what. Let's see. Here, I've got to click one little button here, make sure everything is all set here to do that. Just a little glitch with my, hopefully no glitch here, no break in sequence. Just something when my daughter tripped in here, she apparently unplugged my my hardwire, and so my wireless was picking us up. Hopefully that's a little stronger signal now. So yeah, it was all made for battleship targeting too, IOX. So what else did you have? You had social progressivism in Star Trek. Despite all the science fiction based influences of Star Trek, it was the show's progressivism in a time of social and political upheaval that remains its greatest achievement. Keep in mind, you're talking Star Trek came post Kennedy era, Lyndon Baines Johnson era, Martin Luther King Jr. era, the civil rights movement. All of this was going on. And the series consistently dealt with subjects like sexism, feminism, racism, militarism, well, which were all directly connected to the events occurring in the late 1960s, but continue to be relevant to this day. Most notable is how Star Trek dealt with race. On a surface level, the series was pretty unusual at the time, and even now, unfortunately, for simply having a multicultural cast, including George Takei, who was Japanese, Nichelle Nichols, who was African American, Walter Koenig, who played Chekhov, was not Russian. So the show pushed race boundaries. The most well-known being when William Shatner, and you know this, guys, if you follow Trek, the first interracial kiss on television happened on Star Trek. William Shatner kissed Nicole Nichols in an episode marking the first interracial kiss on television. And of course, the show wasn't perfect when it came to progressivism, as we've all seen. It simply wasn't possible in that climate. But considering the era in which Roddenberry was writing the show, it should be applauded that he attempted to break barriers whenever he could. Now, I'm not talking about, I have a problem with socialism, but social progressivism, the things that move us forward, the eradication of racism, of feminism, of sexism, and things like that. Those are all good and noble, lofty things. So, yeah, Scotty was your favorite, James. Yeah, James Doohan. Now, a lot of these guys, by the way, are dying off. There's not many people left from the original cast. So far, we've lost, I think the first to go was DeForest Kelley, who played McCoy. Quite a while back now. Then James Doohan, who played Scotty. Leonard Nimoy, of course, who played Spock. I think everybody else is still alive. There was a little scare with Nichelle Nichols not long ago. And a lot of the supporting actors that you've seen in other episodes and stuff like that have died and passed on. Shatner is pushing 90 right now. So he's still going strong. Should I look so good and be in such good shape and do so much when I'm 90 years old? So, let's see. I think that's it. I think that's all I have on that particular list. So Star Trek influenced, there are whole books that have been written on the technology of Star Trek and how it has influenced scientists. Pretty heavy books, really, when you think about it, the stuff they talk about. So Star Trek had an influence not just on social things, not just on personal things, not just on individuals, but also on the development of science. So now, um, talking about how Star Trek affected us on a personal or a Zen level. I did a whole episode of the show once on something that had happened to me as a kid that was, and how William Shatner or Captain Kirk was part of the protection mechanism that took place in me. And I was actually told by a psychologist at the time, she said, "You would not believe the number of men my age who held Captain Kirk as a hero, or that Captain Kirk played some sort of psychological defense mechanism in their head." And that's what it did to me. And yeah, Jeffrey Hunter was a hunk Pike. So is Anson Mount. He's a pretty good Captain Pike. So stay thirsty, my friend's guy is still alive, and he was always getting killed. Yeah, that's true. So Kirk, I think he is, if I'm not mistaken, somebody just corrected me. I think he's 88 or 89 years old, or right at 90, something like that. But he's getting up there. I thought he was 92 when I said that, and I was corrected by somebody who knows him. So let me go back through and check some of your comments here. When I had my own issues, abuse from my childhood, things like that, the being raised without a father, which is pretty commonplace nowadays, especially guys my age. I'm almost 60 years old, and you talk to a lot of guys my age, and they've gone through this stuff, and a lot of them, the ones that watch Star Trek, seem to always have had Kirk as this hero figure. And let's see, I've been keeping up pretty well, I think. But I wanted to see if you guys had anything more to say. Okay. Just comments all the way through. Okay. Well, I was just seeing what was being said. Sorry for the slow reading, squinting just a little bit. So, this situation that happened to me, and I've talked about this before, I was abused as a kid. And that particular part of my memory, I never lost it, always remembered it. It was always there. But what I did was I found later in life, when I was dealing with some of the issues, that they start to come out. When you have sexual abuse issues or abuse issues as little kids, sometimes those things don't hit until your late 20s, your early 30s. And for me, that was the same mold. I was in my late 20s, my early 30s, when this stuff started to emerge. And I had a counselor I was seeing, a psychologist or psychiatrist. I can't remember which it is. But she was using this technique. And you remember we talked about this on one of my shows, where she took a pencil, and she held on. She said, "I'm not hypnotizing you." But she did this kind of, it wasn't fast. Yeah, it was. It was like that. And you kind of see the pencil look a little rubbery. And she just watched that. And she said, "I'm not going to put you to sleep, nothing like that. I'm not going to make any suggestions. But what I want you to do," she says, "is picture an event in your life that for you was what you would consider a horrible event." And she had a reason for sending me back to that, because this is where we usually get hooked as kids, and it changes who we are and our patterns of behavior, our modes of operation, all of that stuff. And so I came up with, one of these instances of abuse. And as I told you when I told this story before, she said, okay, now go with that as if you're watching it go by you, as if you're looking out a train window or on a movie screen. Don't be part of it, observe it. And as I was doing that, the 1960s Captain Kirk uniform came into the picture and was, in my mind's eye, protecting me from the abuse. And that, she said, was the thing that was buried in me. Kirk had become a protective mechanism for me. It was something, he was a fictional character in which I placed my abuses. Now, I don't like talking about these other than it's a good story nowadays. And I don't mean that flippantly. It's a good story. I think it's helpful to people. I haven't camped there. I'm not there anymore. That's in my past. I don't need to bring anything up about abuse or counseling or anything like that to get pats on the back or to shed a tear and say, hi, my name's Scotty. I have this problem in my past. It's not why I bring it up. I bring it up to talk about this stuff. How, as kids, and the article I wrote on this was to say, parents, don't let your kids find their parent in something else. It was a thing about, it was written to my dad in a sense, who never saw it, but don't abandon your kids. Your kids need you there. And it was Kirk from Star Trek that had become so important to me because I found in him the surrogate father, quote unquote, in whom I could bury the pain. And he held it and carried it until I was old enough to cope with it. And when I started coping with it, I know it was him in whom I buried the pain because he was the one that brought it out. When I first started coping with it, I'm in a counselor's office. We're talking about this stuff. And who shows up but Captain Kirk? So I wrote a whole thing on this. So I've always said that, the pains you have from your past, you can camp there or you can break the chain and move on from it. I broke the chain and moved on from it. I don't live back there. The only time I go back there, and yeah, there's emotion involved in it, and you relive that emotion a little bit, but it's not here in the present. It's the memory of something, or it's the feeling that's evoked by that. What I noticed was the abuse in my past as a little kid that formed patterns of who I am. And again, I hailed the Kirk. I remember I said this a long time ago. I said, I need my pain. I don't need to eradicate that. The reason I need it is because that's formed who I am. And it's funny that I didn't learn that from Kirk, but that was reinforced by that character and some of the fictional lines given to him. And letting go and moving on, it helps a lot. It does, but it's that ability to actually do that. And all I was going to say about making this, again, the link to Star Trek, the Zen of Trek, the consciousness of Trek, the places where it puts you, is I used those things to further myself along, to protect myself, to bury things in. That tin can buried in the garden 50 years ago, that you go out at night with an old tattered map and a flashlight and a shovel and try to dig up to find out the source of what happened to you. And when you uncover it, you find out pops Captain Kirk, Star Trek, the things that I was learning. So Star Trek had this effect not only on society in general, but on people, individuals. We took that, we appropriated it. We wanted to be that. You can take something fictional like that, a TV series in this case, and it affects a whole generation to one point or another. And that generation grew up doing the things that were put forward in that series, things that they wanted to see happen. So I would say the Zen of Star Trek is the thing that comes in and it calms you and it makes you go on and want to do something better. It's something you always think as a writer. I'm a writer. I think I want to change somebody's life. I want to write something. I want to write the great American novel. It's like we talked about this the other night, To Kill a Mockingbird, great American novel. That changed a lot of people's lives. It had effect on people. So to say I could write a great American novel that would affect people would be the ultimate goal of writing. Yes, it's a release. Yes, it's telling stories. It's doing things. But imagine if your words could affect people and change people. This is what Roddenberry did with Star Trek. He changed people. He changed people's direction. He wasn't the perfect man himself. I mean, he was married to his wife and having an affair with Nichelle Nichols and having an affair with, at the same time, with Majel Barrett. Now, he ended up divorced and he ended up marrying Majel Barrett. Some people would look at that. Some people see that in our own president and say, oh, well, he was having an adulterous affair. What kind of guy is he? You know what? Shit happens. And so what I saw out of that show happening, well, it's more in retrospect. You didn't see it as it was happening. So looking back on it, is it influenced people to be better people, to strive for better things, to be in that, not to be sing-songy about it, but to go to those places that no man or no person has gone before. That's what they did as a result of that. So that is, to me, what I mean by the Zen of Star Trek. What it has done for me personally, what it has done for people in general, what it did pop culturally to our world, what it's still doing to a certain extent. I think Star Trek has, to some degree, lost that original spark. And all I mean by that is not the excitement of the science fiction, not good storytelling, not good writing, but a first time can only happen once. And when that happened with Star Trek back in the 60s, it made something that spawned something else. We've got Spawn of Trek nowadays, which still upholds some of the same things, might accomplish some of those things on some level, but it's not what it was in the original, which started it all. So, without waxing too esoteric and too philosophical, that's my presentation on Star Trek. Tonight, in about 45 minutes, I'm going to be interviewing Dan Madsen, and hence why I'm wearing this tonight. I'm wearing this because I didn't know what I was going to talk on tonight until I said, hey, going to be talking to Dan Madsen at midnight, 11 Central. Why don't I do something that's a bit of a precursor to that, to talk about some things? And maybe Dan and I will hit some of these topics. He's a very interesting man. You're going to enjoy listening to him. And his story about how Star Trek changed him. He's about my age. And I think I think we're almost the same age. But Star Trek changed his life forever when he was a kid. And you know what it did for him? It didn't just change his life. It changed his entire life, his entire profession, his entire career was changed by that television show, and a simple message in that show. That message being Kirk, and Dan will talk about this, but Kirk talking to another character and saying, where I come from, everybody is equal. It doesn't matter what size you are. It doesn't matter what shape you are, what color you are. We're all considered equal. And that's the thing that affected Dan, and you'll find out why when he tells his story tonight. So be here for that. The rank I'm wearing, this isn't rank. It's the symbol in the center. The command had a star, a tall star in it. This is the sciences. This would be like Spock, Dr. McCoy. They were the sciences. Then it was kind of a hatched 3/4 circle. I don't know what the shape is called. Almost a polygonic 3/4 of a circle with jagged edges. That was the engineering staff and the security and things like that. So the staff was back in the old Star Trek indicated by the ribbon on the sleeves. And if you notice those, go look up some pictures. If you haven't watched the original Trek, I'd suggest doing it. It's well worth spending your time. Start from the beginning, though. And I think you're going to enjoy it. And you'll start to, you go through a season of that, you're going to get an idea of what changed me, what had an effect on me, what had an effect on Dan. And so be sure to be here for Rocky Stucci's and my show, the Situation Room. And Rocky's not there, but I'll be interviewing Dan in about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. So there is my little presentation. As I said at the beginning, off the top of my head, not really planned. You can see we jumped around a little bit from idea to idea, but I wanted to give to you a little preface on Trek before I interview Dan in 45 minutes. And I think that it will help if you were here and you go there, you're going to get it even better. So Captain Scotty sounds good. Yeah, I like the ring of that, Topper. That works for me. Let's take a couple minutes and just look at some comments, see what we got going on. Favor to all and love to going for now. See you, Susie Q. In the Situation Room. Topper, you the man. Thank you, Topper. Letting go and moving on. Yep, that's where we're talking about that stuff. And Topper, yeah, now you understand why Captain Kirk means a great deal to me. He was actually, I think, a part of my subconscious for a long time. And once you release that, all of a sudden, it wasn't so much a love of the fictional character as it became my love for Trek changed. It turned into loving the way, understanding the way a show like that was put together. The actors, the sets, the scripting, and all of that. That's what it became for me. Enjoying the functional aspects of the show as opposed to the characters being part of who I was. There was a big changeover after that. So let's see. Looking smooth, says Topper. Thank you, sir. Gene Roddenberry did make you think outside the box, James. He did indeed. Let me go back a little bit. What's going on? Yes, race. Way beyond its times. It was awesome. That's very true. I never had Romulan ale, James. I would like to try that. I've got some Jamesons sitting over there and some Glenmorangie and an old Lagavulin, but I don't have any Romulan ale. I'm going to have to take a trip to Romulus and get some because it's a real place. I do still want to be a starship captain, though. I'm not too old to do that. All right, folks, there we go. Let's wrap it up. I hope this was enjoyable for you. A little talk about Star Trek. Prepping you. This was kind of a primer for what we're going to do with Dan tonight. So come on over and listen. Please do like this video on your way out. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. What else did I want to say? Go to my website, scottallenroberts.com. You can see all about me over there. Remember, I do tarot readings. Tonight's Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday. Friday is tarot night. So we're going to do some readings tomorrow night on air. Live readings, 1 to 3 card readings. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. Give you a taste of what it's like. Some of you have come in and I've had several people come and get readings this week, and I really appreciate it. And I want to thank you for being here and for doing that. And that helps me. If there are donations you can set up for doing stuff like this to help run what we do. But if you can just come in and pick up one of our t-shirts or get yourself a tarot reading, you get something back for giving us something. And I appreciate that. So I appreciate each and every one of you here. Go over to streamingtalkradio.com, streamingtalkradio.com, and take a look around at all our stuff over there. And click on Son of a Patriot, sign up, get yourself a shirt. Not sign up, get yourself a shirt. And we will see you in about, well, like we say almost every night. It's like we come to a natural end at about 10:20, because almost every night I say, we'll see you in about 40 minutes over on Rocky's channel for the Situation Room. So thanks for being here. I love you all. And I mean that. I mean that because I don't know y'all personally, but I love you and I appreciate the fact that you would spend your time coming to listen to me talk, babble on for an hour and 20 minutes about Star Trek. So have a good night. We'll see you in a little while over on Rocky's channel or back here again tomorrow night. Come for the readings, sit for the fun. See you later.